All right. Welcome, welcome. I am seeing we are trying to connect to the live stream, and I think it's happening. So happy Clear Vision Wednesday, everybody. This is our weekly show educating you on all things vision improvement and eye health. And today I have a special guest, a holistic optometrist. Those are my favorite people because they know a lot about eyes, but they also understand that the traditional model of eye care is probably not the best model to preserve your eyesight and eye health for a long life, for a long, healthy life. So, without further ado, and I want to say our topic is sunlight, which is a topic we get so many questions about because usually you hear, put your sunglasses on the second you leave the house. And today we're going to talk about sunlight. Is that really the best advice or not? So let me bring her on, Dr. Valerie Giangrande. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Claudia. Thank you so much for having me.
So, recently met. I mean, we met through a colleague of ours, not doctor, but Rudy Nassif, who's
hmm
on natural diet. And when we first talked, I was like, I got so excited just talking to you. So tell us a little bit, how did you get into this like different view? I'm assuming maybe you already had this as you studied optometry. I think you've been doing it for over 20 years. But
hmm
is that a more recent development that you learned more about holistic approaches? Tell us a little bit about that.
So, yeah, I've been like you said, an optometrist for 20 years and just regular conventional optometrist with the regular training. And then when I had kids, I started my son. This is already, God, he's about 12 years ago. He started getting some health issues. So what do? You go to the pediatrician and you start asking for help, and they don't offer any help. And I remember saying, could it be any relation to maybe food or toxins or something? And of course, the answer was no. Here's a medication. So I didn't like that answer, and that led me on a journey for functional medicine. And we changed our diet, we had changed our toxins. I used essential oil. We did all these amazing things, and it really did help. So I started to become more holistic, and I wanted to learn more. So I became a holistic health coach for nutrition, more for myself, just to kind of learn more. So I was doing all these things in my life, but I still had my own health issues, and I wanted to find more help. So I went to a functional medicine doctor for myself. And one of the first things he said to me was, how much sun exposure do you get? Now, again, I'm an optometrist. So what do?
Right.
I wear my sunglasses all the time. I wear sunblock. I hid from the sun. And he said, I think that might be one of your problems. So he introduced me to this brilliant neurosurgeon, Dr. Cruz. And if anyone knows who he is, you start reading his take on this, his information, and it's just completely mind blowing. Completely changed how I think about our health and everything that I've learned, and it completely changed my life. So I started to incorporate these principles, these quantum principles, into my life. I started educating patients, and then I became certified as an applied quantum biology practitioner very recently. So I just have delved into this so much, and it's mind blowing, just such foundational information, and it's simple. It makes so much sense, and I really just want people to know about it because I think that we've been told some interesting information that may not be as helpful as we think.
So yeah, I mean, especially, I work with people with all kinds of conditions, and obviously I'm not a doctor. I often send my clients to a doctor if needed. But we get these questions all the time, or they tell me all the time, I have a cataract, my doctor said I got too much sun, or usually it's with the eye diseases where I hear more about, I did this wrong. I never wore sunglasses. Now my eye doctor told me I got all these challenges. So tell us a little bit about, like, maybe educate us a little bit on what is sunlight, because I was just shooting a little Instagram video and it's overcast. That's another question I get all the time. What about
Mhm.
if it's an overcast day or a cloudy day? Or maybe educate us a little bit about sunlight. What's the difference between the UV rays and the light and
Mhm.
the different colors? Because it looks just like white to us, right? But
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. So before I talk about sunlight, I just like to say that waves of light is how we communicate. It's how our body, we physically need that full spectrum of sunlight for us to work properly. So the beautiful thing about sunlight is that it's always changing. So we have all these different rays and all of the different frequencies of the sun. And I'm talking about there's visible light, the rainbow. There's our ultraviolet light, there's infrared light. That combination, that full spectrum of sun is like a nutrient for our bodies. And we need that full spectrum of sun for our bodies to work. So In a perfect world, when that sun is rising, the sunrise is full of red and infrared and just a little bit of that blue light. And we are wired for that particular signal of blue from that sunrise through our eyes to set the time in our brain. That's what sets our rhythm for the day. But I'm going to talk about just sunlight for a moment, not how the eyes work. So we have infrared light from that morning sun. Infrared light is always present in the sun. It's very helpful. But infrared light is what powers up our energy cells. It allows us to make melatonin in our bodies throughout the day, in our energy, our mitochondrial cells. Blue light is what starts the cortisol production in the body. Like all of these signals are what we're meant to absorb that perfect signal. And then as the sun is rising, when the sun reaches about 10 degrees above, maybe about an hour after sunrise, we start getting some ultraviolet A light that starts to show up. And here's where, we've been so conditioned to think that ultraviolet light is one of the worst things. We have to hide from this light. But it turns out we physically need ultraviolet light through our eyes to do so many amazing things that I will get into. So we do need naked eye exposure to ultraviolet A light to actually make and modulate hormones and do all of these beautiful things. And then when the sun rises a little bit more, when it reaches, say, about 30 degrees, and in certain times of the year, it depends if you live in a seasonal climate, that's when UVB is present. And we all know that we need that ultraviolet B exposure to make vitamin D in our skin. But there's also a lot of benefits to that ultraviolet B exposure. And then again, as the sun is setting, we start to lose the ultraviolet B, and then we lose the ultraviolet A, and then we're left with, again, this beautiful red signal. Blue starts to get lower. And then our body knows it's time to start getting ready for sleep, right? And then we're supposed to have darkness at night. So that's basically the rundown of the sun, but I can get into how it works with our eyes, because that's probably one of the most important things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. So what about, you kind of skip the middle of the day, but we know that I guess a lot of these
Right.
like different colors or frequencies are probably at the highest level in the middle of the day. And you brought up a good point. Are you living in Northern Europe or somewhere close to the North Pole where you have huge swings and like amount of daylight?
Mm-hmm.
Here, or do you live closer to the equator where obviously the sun is stronger, but it's the same pretty much throughout the year. So there's a lot of different factors. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the eyes and the anatomy
Right.
and how this works. I think that's a very good point.
Absolutely. And I did forget to answer your question. It doesn't matter if it's cloudy. We need those sun signals will still come through on a cloudy day, a snowy day, a rainy day. Okay. So getting back to our eyes. So our eyes are not meant to, we obviously can see, that's one of the benefits of our eyes, but we have signals, we have cells in our eyes that are waiting for signals of light so that it tells time for our body. So we have these cells in our eyes called melanopsin. They are blue light receptors. And again, they are waiting for that specific blue light signal from that sunrise to send a message. As soon as we see that blue light with our melanopsin receptors, they fire and they go to the brain and they stimulate that clock in our brain, that suprachiasmatic nucleus, our master clock, and it tells the body it's morning. Let's start releasing cortisol. Let's wake up. Let's get hungry. Let's do all of the things we're supposed to do in the correct order, because every function in our body is on a timer, and we need the specific timing of things to happen. So in the morning, our cortisol is supposed to rise, and we get that from the sunlight. If we're wearing sunglasses, we're not getting that. There is no UV in that early morning sun for the first hour. So people who are very fearful of ultraviolet light, it doesn't exist for that first hour of sunrise. So that's the first thing. And then as that sun is rising and we get to that UVA rise, when that ultraviolet light just starts to show up, we have cells in our eyes that are waiting for ultraviolet A. We have neuropsin cells on our cornea that are UVA receptors. We also have amino acids in our eyes. And when I say amino acids, I'm talking about amino acids that are, again, waiting to trap that ultraviolet A signal to make hormones. So our eyes are a hormone-making organ. And I can't stress that enough, that we physically need ultraviolet A light through our eyes to make serotonin through our eyes. We make dopamine through our eyes. We start making it through our eyes. Serotonin turns into melatonin. So for our sleep patterns, we physically need that light to get into our eyes so that we could sleep later in the day. That's what sets our sleep cycles. UVA light also helps us make thyroid hormones starting in our eyes. We make melanin. Melanin is what protects us from the sun, and it does so many amazing things for our eye health and for our overall health. So you can see that if we're always lacking that ultraviolet A light by wearing sunglasses, we're missing those entire signals. And it's the most important thing we can do to establish the health of our entire body, because again, that brain, that master clock, is in charge of the entire body. And then when we get into that UVB, when that sun is a little bit stronger, now we do have to be careful. Obviously, too much sun is not good for us. We have to be careful. I am not suggesting that we stare at the sun, and I'm not suggesting that we go outside, all day long and not protect ourselves. However, for UVB, when we are making vitamin D, we really shouldn't be wearing sunglasses at that time, because our eyes need to know what time it is so that we can make vitamin D in our skin. Our eyes need to know what time it is because we have these built-in safety mechanisms to get safe sun exposure when our eyes have the same signal of our skin. So those are times also where I would say, don't wear your sunglasses. And then sunset is this beautiful time of day where we start getting that red light. The brain says it's time to start resting and repairing. And then in a perfect world, after sunset, we are supposed to have darkness. And that's where things go wrong in our modern world, which I will get into shortly. Just let me know if you have any questions about anything that I just said.
Total sense. I mean, the eyes, especially the retina, is actually a protrusion from the brain. So the retina, right, is actually brain. So it makes total sense that we need the eyes. And I read somewhere, and I don't know if that's true, the melanopsin cells, those kind of blue receptors, that even blind people who don't have actual, like, as long as they have eyeballs, that they still can those cells can still perceive the light, like that it's morning. Even is that true? Like, I've read that.
I think I've read that also. There are ways. We also have melanopsin in our skin as well. So the eyes are the most important trigger, but we do have, so for people who have, say, retinal damage or, extreme, if their melanopsin cells are destroyed, I mean, we do have that in our skin. So I think there are other ways, but the eyes really are. And what's interesting about melanopsin is that they're below, they're on the lower part of our retina. So we're designed to be outside so that sun is hitting us at an angle. So we don't have to, we're not going outside to stare at the sun. We're just getting outside. And it's such a natural, beautiful way that nature is designed to keep us healthy with sunlight in our eyes.
So there's a question that here from my Clear Vision Club peeps, and I see that, what do we do if we don't get up at sunrise? And this is obviously, especially in the winter, I do get up, even in the summer, I usually get up at 5, and then sunrise is at like 5:40 here. So what do we do if we have to get up, or we want to get up before the sun rises? Is that like screwing up?
So if you're getting up before sunrise, yeah, that's a wonderful question. So here's what I do. When we wake up, do you want me to, I just want to get into the dangers of artificial light before I answer that question. Would that make more sense?
Then let's do that. Let's do that in the correct order. Okay.
Okay, just because it would make more sense.
Yeah.
So in our world, we are exposed. So most of us are inside for very large portions of the day. And this is where the problem comes in, because we are exposed to lights that don't exist in nature. So every LED light that we're exposed to, computer screens, phones, TVs, they're all considered this what we call just blue light. Everyone has heard of blue light, but I don't know if people understand the reason why it's so damaging. The color temperature of all of these artificial lights are the same color of the sun at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. So when we wake up in the morning and we turn on our lights and we look at our phone and we turn on the TV, our brain goes right to 12 o'clock. So we have this cortisol, production for lunchtime. And then if we're inside all day, we just have this lunchtime signal all day long. So, I mean, it's just very disruptive. Our hormones aren't correct. Our body's just not working the way it's supposed to. Fast forward to nighttime. So now the sun has set. It's dark outside. Our brain is trying to get ready to rest and repair. And that melatonin, so all that serotonin that we should have made from the sun will start to be transferred to melatonin. And then when we see darkness for a few hours, the brain will release that melatonin, and then we can sleep. Melatonin repairs the entire body while we're sleeping. It takes care of cancer cells. It takes care of all the inflammation. It's just such a wonderful thing that we should be making naturally when we sleep. When we're exposed to a blue light signal at night, The brain is saying, I'm really tired. I would love to release that melatonin, but you know what? It must be 12 o'clock in the afternoon because I still see lights. So here's what happens. Now we get another shot of cortisol at night when we're supposed to have low cortisol. So what does cortisol do at the wrong time? If we have cortisol at night, now we start getting an increase in blood sugar, an increase in insulin, an increase in our appetite. Our stress levels are messy. Our blood pressure goes up. We can't get tired. We won't release melatonin. Melatonin will not be released if we have high cortisol. So all of those things turn into a really huge, huge risk for so many conditions. I mean, if you do searches, blue light or circadian disruption in any disease you can think of, it's all linked to this light. So back to that answer, if you wake up before sunrise and you're exposing yourself to lights, what you want to do is wear these blue light blockers. So these glasses like this, which I know that you have, Claudia, they block 100% of blue light. So after that sun sets, we need the brain to think that it's nighttime. And to do that by wearing something that does block 100% of blue light, it gives the brain the potential to say, okay, now it's nighttime. Now we can get tired. Now we can release melatonin. So in the winter, the sun sets pretty late. The sun rises pretty late. So I'll wear these in the morning. I walk around the house. I don't put on overhead lights in the morning. I don't want any of that brightness or those lights to stimulate. So you have the same ones, right?
I have the clip-ons from Viva
Yes,
Rays.
yes, from Viva. That's what I have as well.
I've used it. I use it at night every night, but I also have all my lights really dim. I don't have any ceiling lights, and I have like some orange, lampshades basically that make yeah. So you don't always, but yeah. So basically, I've never tried this in the morning, so that's a good idea. So turn the artificial light on, but then have the red light so that you kind of mimic the real like natural light rhythm. So that makes sense. What other question did I have about that? So yeah, I think I do want to come because you mentioned melatonin, because just last week there was a study released that showed that people, and I put all the details on my blog, that people that take melatonin supplements, and in the study, they didn't check how much they took, but basically there was a prevention and also an improvement in age-related macular degeneration. Now, I think there's a rampant use of melatonin supplementation because of all the sleep issues that people have, because they got all that junk light exposure, because they don't get natural light. But so we definitely know, right, that melatonin is, like you talked about, repairing all this stuff. But AMD, usually people are advised, and cataract, same thing, like don't get sunlight, So AMD is the center of the eye, right? Like, don't go outside. So what do you have to say about that? And I would be curious.
Absolutely. So melatonin, I'll get into the supplement issue in a second, but melatonin regenerates our cone cells, our photoreceptors while we're sleeping. So the macula has the highest level of cone photoreceptors right in the center. Without melatonin, we cannot regenerate them. So sleep and proper melatonin levels are extremely important. The issue I have with melatonin supplements is that if our body is making something and you take it, you're disrupting that feedback loop. You're disrupting your own body. I mean, it's much better to make it, to get that sunshine and to release it at night, doing the proper things. That's the way our body is built. I don't usually recommend taking melatonin, but absolutely, melatonin is crucial not only for the macula, it's crucial for glaucoma. There are melatonin receptors in practically every part of the eye, dry eyes, cataract, everything. There's everything you can think of that has to do with the eye requires melatonin, requires, all aspects of the sun, which I can get into. But yes, melatonin is extremely important. And I forgot what else I was going to say about that.
So you wanted to, so basically we know it's important, that, right?
Right.
But you're saying not supplementing because doing it the natural way.
The other thing about melatonin, which is very interesting, is that infrared light, infrared light is always present in the sun, no matter what time of day. It's just so beautiful. Infrared light is almost 50% of the sun, maybe even more than that. And when we're exposed to infrared light, we make melatonin all day long in our mitochondria, in those energy cells. And we're actually making this local melatonin, and melatonin is an antioxidant, a very natural antioxidant. So when we think of melatonin, we think of it as our sleep hormone. So maybe about 5% of that melatonin is in our pineal gland, and that's what helps us sleep. But melatonin during the day is also extremely important. And we cannot make melatonin during the day if we're inside sitting in front of blue lights, because they took all the infrared out of our bulbs. We can't get incandescence anymore. All of these bulbs are high, efficient. We can't have infrared in these bulbs. So we're lacking infrared light. We're lacking that melatonin during the day. And we're not getting any ultraviolet exposure because we're wearing sunglasses, and we're getting blue light all day and all night. So we don't have melatonin. So of course, people will turn to a supplement when really we really need to fix our lighting environment.
That is because I think the problem is it got pushed out so quickly, all about energy, but nobody looked at health. And, I mean, not a conspiracy theorist person at all, but I'm thinking now they can sell the infrared light, right? Because studies have shown, right? The University of London, the mitochondrial health, you talked about this, how important infrared light exposure is. But now people are getting devices, and we do recommend the blue blockers for those specific needs inside. But again, now people are just like, they take melatonin supplements, they buy the infrared lights, they buy sunglasses. So it's a consumer spending spree that we literally didn't have to spend any money on if we just follow the natural rhythms.
It's so true. It's so true.
And that sometimes is that question is that, at the end of the day, the world is ruled by money, and that's not our topic. But my point is like natural free things are often also not recommended by your colleagues a lot of times, right? So we can talk about glasses another time. I would love to have that discussion with you on another time when we can bring you back. But so let's get back to, there is this kind of fear of blue light. You talked about how the artificial light bulbs make us think it's like noon all the time, right? So we have that blue light from computer screens, from LEDs, from all these artificial sources. But what about the actual blue light at noon outside? What about that? So talk a little bit about that. Do we need to protect you guys? Tell us a little bit about this scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. So blue light in general, the way our body works with light, again, light is a communication signal. That's our electrical signal in the body. That's how we work. So when we're exposed to blue light in the sun, it's actually a reaction of an oxidation reaction that happens, and that's the signal. That's what signals time in the body. It's kind of an inflammatory signal. Well, when we're exposed to blue light in the sun, we're talking always about that full spectrum light. Now, red light that's always there is going to be the antidote to that inflammation. So blue light from the sun is never bad for us because it's always balanced by red light, by infrared light. It's always like stopping that inflammation. The problem with the blue by itself is that there is no red to stop the oxidative stress. There's no infrared to help our mitochondria. There's no ultraviolet to stop the production of those hormones that are happening. So red light, blue light, when we're exposed to blue light on the retina, it's actually oxidizing our cells. It's taking those photoreceptors and it's damaging them, because what it's doing is it's splitting vitamin A from that photoreceptor, and that vitamin A in that free form is very toxic to the cells, and that's what can create damage to the macula. It can create damage to the retinal cells, creates oxidative stress in general, and we require that red and infrared light to balance that out. So blue light by itself, we have no chance. It's just blue. So, we've been told that the sun is what creates macular degeneration. The sun is what causes cataracts, and everybody's told to wear sunglasses. And while there is obviously some truth to too much UV causing these problems,
right,
our modern world, people aren't outside anymore. I see cataracts in people who never go outside. Macular degeneration. I ask everybody, how much time do you ever go outside? Oh, I never go outside. I wear my sunglasses. The sun is hot. People getting these horrible, horrible eye issues who never leave the house, or who never leave the house without sunglasses. And you get people who are outside all day whose eyes are fine. So, it's not all about that ultraviolet. I think we've just taken it to the extreme. So
right.
while I'm not saying if you're outside all day, don't get sunburn, don't be exposed too much, but we need the natural sunlight, especially, at times throughout the day, and for all the other reasons that I mentioned.
So there's a question on YouTube which totally fits into, but you kind of answered it. So Virginia is saying, I've always worn sunglasses. Now I have AMD. Should I stop wearing glasses in the sunlight so that my body can naturally work on its own? So I think it's really important that what you said, there's two things. And also we need to make sure this is not medical advice. This is education, right? You give patients in your office, but basically, yes, there is so much as to like have too much sun exposure. But I always say like you're skiing and it's white and it's blue sky, or you're in the ocean and you're outside all day, like some gardeners or some farm workers or, those kind of things. But most of us nowadays spend like almost no time outside, right? So, but is that, what do you say to Virginia? Would you, again, knowing this is not medical advice, but is it?
With not giving medical advice, I would say that early morning exposure is probably the most important exposure to get. That sunrise light, there's no UV in that morning sun. Red and infrared have the power to help heal our mitochondria. With macular changes, again, if there's too much damage, it's a little tougher, of course, but we need to bathe those cells. We need to, and again, that red and infrared light, when there's no strong UV, is probably the most important thing we can do. And blocking every single bit of that artificial light at night. And during the day, I think you had this also, during the day, you want to wear something that's yellow. You need to block your artificial light indoors during the day, about half as much during the day, all of it at night, and get as much morning exposure as you possibly can. Once you handle that, if you can get a little bit of that UVA rise, again, the UVA is very mild at that time. We need those hormones to be made. We need those neurotransmitters to be made. So again, those are pretty safe times to get. What I do if I'm in when it's too bright, this isn't aside from that macular issue, I'll put on a hat. I'll go under an umbrella. I do protect myself. I'm not outside all the time. So, but yeah, that's what I would recommend definitely as a good starting point. That red light in the morning sun is fairly safe. It's so helpful for us, and we need it and every single aspect of our body requires it.
So basically slowly build it up your tolerance and, yes. And so remember, Virginia, too, what we just talked about, the melatonin, obviously you can also, if you like talk to your doctor and you can try some of the supplementation, but ideally you want to make that in your body, but that means you have to get that natural light exposure. And I don't know, do you have any answer to that question? Maybe you don't. How long does it take for somebody who's always worn sunglasses? Like, how long does it take for that natural rhythm to get going so that you actually produce enough melatonin? Let's say you always wear the Viva Rays or other like junk light, blockers inside, and you do the early morning sunrise with naked eye and the evening. And so so how long would it take to kind of, I mean, I know maybe you don't know the answer to that.
It's hard to say. I feel like everybody is different. And some people feel, I don't know anybody who doesn't feel better just from getting sunshine in the morning. But it's hard to say. I don't know exactly how much or how quickly it would be, it would be made, but consistency is the most important. So if you happen to be looking at sunrise for 20 minutes one day and then you miss it for 4 days in a row, that's not important. You have to have it consistently, even if it's 5 minutes every morning. Consistency through an open window or outside. It has to be consistent. So it depends on how long, how much of a dysregulation there was to begin with. The longer it's been. I mean, I learned about this. I'm almost 50 years old. I didn't know this. I only knew this for the last, 6 years. My whole life, I was in sunglasses for the most part, except when I was a child. So yeah, I had a lot to really work on. It took a while, but I will say, as far as light sensitivity, I have pretty light eyes, and it was pretty quick for me to really develop a nice ability to be outside comfortably without feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to put my sunglasses on. So for me, it was a few weeks, and it was great.
Yeah, same here. I was super light sensitive, and interestingly enough, I don't know if you noticed, it really helped my night driving, because at night with the oncoming car lights, I struggled. And when I got rid of the sunglasses, again, I'm just using them in extreme conditions, but I'm also spending a lot of time indoors. Night driving was easy peasy. I do want to talk a couple more things. One thing I do want to cover, and we can see what order makes sense, would be like, you talked a little bit about darkness at night. So we talked about the light during the day. I think darkness at night, and then I would love to get more into specific other conditions like glaucoma, floaters, myopia, all that. So I don't know what makes sense in your opinion.
Yeah. So again, darkness at night looks like wearing glasses like this, but we also want to be careful about anything that's too bright. So any overhead lights, if you're wearing glasses like this, but you still have all of these really strong overhead lights, you're still going to be stimulated. Our skin, keep in mind, we do have those melanopsin receptors on our skin. So even if we're covered and if we're under all of these bright lights, our skin has the potential to also wake us up because of those. So we just want it to be darker and dimmer. So I actually have a lot of different bulbs that I put, I turn off the overhead lights. I have lamps in the rooms that are amber, and I try to keep it pretty dim. I'm sure my neighbors think we have a weird house because sometimes it looks a little red in the house, but we just try to keep it dim as much as possible. And the bedroom has to be dark. So when you're sleeping, if you're in a room that has light, it shuts down melatonin. It shuts it off, or pretty much. So you want to make sure you're in a room that has blackout curtains, or you're wearing a sleep mask. And we can't have light in our eyes. Even if we wore these and then we go to sleep and our room has lights in it, we need to have darkness. So just that's really one of the most important things. And then just a little side note, we're not meant to eat at night. That's another thing that disrupts our rhythm, and it can disrupt our health, which can affect our eye health. We're not meant to spend energy digesting our food at night. We don't have digestive enzymes really active at night. And this is not very popular because people don't like to eat that early. But we're meant to eat with the sun. We're meant to eat before the sun goes down. So if we're eating 9 o'clock at night, our body's spending all this energy trying to digest food when our digestive enzymes are very low, which is why a lot of us have heartburn or indigestion, and we can't sleep because we really can't digest at night. So by keeping our food earlier to eat with the sun, that also keeps our body within that same rhythm. So that's something. Okay, so we can get into different eye conditions. Absolutely.
I like the food. I think that's such an important part, and I would love to have you back and talk more about that, because obviously diabetic retinopathies, there's so much. But I've been doing intermittent fasting for 6 years, but I used to do lunch and dinner, and now I just shifted to like breakfast, but I eat it around 10. I've never been hungry when I get up ever, even as a child. And now I'm eating my dinner like at like 4 o'clock, or like even before. So definitely before it gets dark. And it just, I mean, sometimes the first few days, it's like, it's like I go to bed at 9 p.m., usually 9:30. And,
Mm-hmm.
by 8 o'clock, you feel that little bit of like, oh, I'm going to hungry again. It's just like a little bit of a mindset thing for me to make a decision. No, I'm not going to do that. And it's just
Right.
actually easy, and I have so much more energy. So it really, really works. I think it's just, and this is just my personal thing. Like, I don't watch TV much, but when I do, that's like the most dangerous time when you like idle watching TV. It's so easy to, like, I can't buy any of the, not that I eat much processed food, but you know what I mean? Even the
Right.
health chips or whatever, I just have to not buy that stuff. So
Right.
I think that's a little bit of a mental uh,
Mm-hmm.
connection. But yeah, let's get into the specifics. So, one thing let's talk about cataracts first. Like,
Okay.
what are your thoughts on that?
So again, cataracts are something also where it's always been known that ultraviolet light is what causes cataracts. And again, there is truth in that. If you're somebody who lives on a tropical place and you're outside all day and you're exposed to these extreme UV conditions, then of course. But our lens is made up of collagen. And that the collagen fibers, they're absorbing light before it gets to our retina. And when we are exposed to these artificial signals of blue light, it's too strong. We're not meant to be absorbing this unbalanced blue. So the lens is doing everything it can to protect us. So it's oxidizing the collagen, and it's creating cataracts a lot sooner. Another thing that can create cataracts just from a circadian rhythm disruption is that when we have that blue light at night, we're more susceptible to getting diabetes and blood pressure and autoimmune issues and allergies and all of these issues that create inflammation in the body. And people who have diabetes tend to get worse cataracts. People who have asthma and use steroid inhalers, they tend to get worse cataracts. Anything that creates a lot of inflammation in the body can have an effect on the eyes. It's just the window to the body. So I think blue light is a big cause. Blue light is also very dehydrating for the body. So sunlight helps us hydrate. Red light is protective. There are some studies, though, that do show that too much heat or infrared light can also be a cause of cataracts, which is interesting because, I always say, oh, red light is so helpful and infrared light is helpful. But in the studies that I was looking at, it was mostly in welders that are exposed to these extreme
Right.
signals of, that wouldn't really happen. So again, I think that full spectrum light is super important. Ultraviolet A light also helps us again, it's melatonin. We need melatonin so we could sleep. Sleep is what heals us. We need vitamin D. Vitamin D is also something that's linked to almost every condition that we could think of. We're lacking vitamin D, and that's creating a lot of health issues, which is, of course, making cataracts worse as well. So cataracts is one of those things that even though it's everyone's wearing their sunglasses, I do think that we need that full spectrum sun. Absolutely. One other thing that's interesting that can also hurt us from an ocular standpoint is being exposed to Wi-Fi. And I know we're talking about sunlight, but signals of Wi-Fi are another electromagnetic signal of technically light that we're not supposed to be exposed to. And that's very damaging to our mitochondrial cells. It actually can create, again, an oxidative stress. It affects the mitochondria. It can dehydrate us. It's just, again, another thing. We're sitting in front of our screens. We're exposed to Wi-Fi. We're not getting that full spectrum sun. Our bodies are not regulated. Hormones play a big role. Our hormones cannot be correctly regulated if we're constantly in this cortisol haze, all day long. So that's another issue with any of these eye issues. Really, hormones play a really large role in that as well. So I'd say that covers most of what I wanted to mention about cataracts.
Covered a lot about cataract. I mean, so I think it's so instead of it's the sun, is again, you talk about extreme conditions, which obviously we know, but a lot of times it comes from that artificial blue light because you get that all day long versus in nature, you have it at high noon, right at the peak, but then there is this curve. So versus with the artificial lighting that we have now, a lot of people have these LED overhead lights on, so there might be that for a long time because it's dark, especially if you live like in the northern hemisphere and, you have these long winters where you just have that light on all day. So that could be really more the bigger culprit than just getting that, blue light, like getting too much blue light from outside, assuming you live in a normal, like not in any extreme conditions, right? That's what I'm hearing.
Right. And that's what I'm seeing clinically as well. I mean, I ask everybody about their environment. And I always like to kind of do my own little, studies in my head to kind of see what's happening. And that's what I'm seeing over and over and over again.
You bring up a really good point. I think doctors like you and other doctors, when you do your patient intake, this is just a little side note that popped into my head. I think if you wrote down meticulously all these things, have the questionnaires, at some point you will see a trend that the people that have the cataracts might not even be outside much. And it's just, I think, you know what I mean? Like, because you see so we get that kind of statistical data, and at some point it would be interesting to see if that really is the correlation versus someone really being outside. I'm curious also, as I'm saying this, what about animals, right? Like, I see a lot of dogs, for instance, now just live inside all day, pretty much most of the day. They go on their walk and then the rest of the day they're inside. I'm wondering if there's also an increase in cataracts in animals that are just spending all day inside.
That's a really interesting question. We don't have any, but that's a really good question. I wonder about that as well. That would be an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, indoor cat. I mean, again, it also depends on the lighting and obviously the incandescent light that we used to have. So I think that's really interesting to kind of, let's look at like another thing that we hear about a lot is floaters. Floaters. I definitely had some floaters and it goes up and down a little bit. And there was a study in Taiwan about bromelain, the enzymes in pineapple, supposedly helping, with destruction of floaters. But what can you say about that? Because as far as I know, there's really no do this one thing and the floaters will go away.
So yeah, floaters are so tough. Because once you have floaters, I don't really know that they can get better depending on, so floaters in general. So we have this ball of jelly inside our eyes. It has hyaluronic acid, collagen, and water. And over time, the hyaluronic acid kind of liquefies and then the collagen separates. And now you're left with these strands of collagen that are floating around, creating shadows. And there are some risks involved. Sometimes they're sticky. It can have retinal holes, all of that. And that's considered an age-related change because over time, things get dry, right? So sometimes those floaters will form. So it does happen as an age-related issue, but there are links to people with hormonal issues sometimes can create more floaters. So it's sometimes more common in women. Blue light, again, the vitreous is absorbing light before it hits the retina. I mean, that's the goal of the eyes, is to take light, and they have all these different layers that are taking that light, absorbing it before it hits our retina, before it goes to the brain. So blue light is a really oxidizing and strong signal. So again, that can also be a factor where it's dehydrating that collagen pretty quickly and it's creating more floaters. There is a doctor, Dr. Tennant, who I really love his research. He's an ophthalmologist, and he talks about the vitreous or the floaters being this lymph vessel, that it's actually lymph. And it's interesting because our lymphatic system is related to light in the sense that we need a good circadian rhythm. We need to be hydrated. We need to have our mitochondria working and everything working properly to dispel toxins, and including our lymph. And a lot of lymph flow can become stagnant when we aren't, when we're not getting the sun, when we're sedentary, doing all of these things. So if we have a lot of that sewage or that extra, all those toxins in the lymph, it can flow into the vitreous and create more floaters. So, that's something that maybe improving that aspect can help. Floaters can happen also sometimes if you have some inflammatory conditions. So of course, reducing inflammation might help. But for the most part, I'd say it's probably easier to try to prevent them as opposed to helping once the collagen is separated. They do tend to sink a little bit. So some people don't notice them after a while. I have had people say, they feel better. Their floaters aren't bothering them. I still see them in the eyes when we look, because you can kind of see them at the bottom. So I don't know once it's separated, if it really does get better. I don't really have a great answer on that.
So in terms, I mean, this is still super helpful. So in terms of prevention, right? Like give us the top. So you talked about hydration. Is it about drinking more water? Is it the right water? We have hydrogen water now. We have the canyon water. We have the alkaline. Like we have all this different stuff. Maybe let's talk just a little bit about hydration. Like what is the right way to hydrate for eye health and what is not so good?
So water is important, absolutely. But when we're talking about dehydration, I'm actually talking about on a cellular level. Our mitochondrial cells require, they need to work well to actually make the water that hydrates us on a cellular level. So drinking water is important, but that's not what's hydrating us on that cellular level. So we really need the sun to power our mitochondria to make that water. Red light actually helps. Infrared light helps. Even ultraviolet light helps us be hydrated. Again, on that cellular level. As far as water, we do want to make sure that we are drinking the cleanest filtered water we possibly can. Minerals are really important because minerals help to structure that water. It helps to just give us more energy. It helps us to absorb that water. We can get into water that's from, high altitudes and different places in the world sometimes can give us a little bit more. That's a whole other topic. I think water is a whole other topic, but we do want to make sure that we do stay hydrated, but that's not really dehydrated. Dehydration happens from blue light. It's literally dehydrating our cells, and drinking more water is not going to help that.
Right.
Being exposed to Wi-Fi is not going to help the dehydration because it's dehydrating our cells. Not a whole lot we could do about that unless we fix our lighting environment. And again, the foods that we eat also play a role. We have to make sure we're eating foods that are in season and that makes sense, from a nature standpoint. So, we want to drink water, but it's not really the answer. It's really light. Again,
That is so interesting, right? So you recommend turning off the Wi-Fi at night, maybe getting Ethernet to your devices if possible. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, super. So, I mean, it's so interesting. So that even the dehydration, the inside dehydration comes from like lack of sunlight exposure, lack of natural light exposure. Super interesting. So what about let's talk about glaucoma, which I feel like like cataracts, glaucoma, and AMD are the big three that I hear a lot when it comes to those they call age-related eye diseases.
Yeah, so glaucoma is interesting. So glaucoma is a nerve disease, right? It's something that has no symptoms. When we think about, there's a lot of different types of glaucoma, but the main kind of glaucoma that we usually think about is this high pressure. So in our eyes have this water pressure similar to a blood pressure, and we expect it to flow. We expect it to be a certain level, and if it's too high or if it's too high, it's creating pressure and it's pushing on that nerve tissue. And over time, that nerve tissue is going to get damaged, and we start to lose vision, and we can end up, having tunnel vision. And if it goes untreated, eventually it is a cause of blindness, and it's scary because there are no symptoms. There are so many studies now saying that melatonin, again, is one of really important to protect that nerve tissue. Again, it protects our nerve tissue. It's brain tissue. We need levels of melatonin to be adequate to help with glaucoma. Again, during the day, infrared light makes melatonin in our mitochondria during the day, and at night we need that melatonin. Nitric oxide is another thing that has to do with the sun, which is also very helpful for glaucoma. So when ultraviolet light hits our skin, we release nitric oxide, and that dilates our blood vessels. It literally lowers blood pressure when we have exposure to sunlight. It does everything, the sun. So when we are expanding our blood vessels and our blood is flowing, that's giving more nutrients to our body, where everything is flowing better. So there are studies showing that nitric oxide can help with eye pressure. And it makes sense because once our blood vessels are dilated, we're getting that flow. So they actually did put nitric oxide in one of the eye drops that we use to treat it because it does help. But again, nitric oxide is a natural thing that we can get from sunlight, from that UV exposure. Again, our eyes have to have the same signal as our skin, but just getting those signals are really naturally helping. Vitamin D is another protective mechanism for glaucoma. Again, sleep. It's interesting. We have a lot of glaucoma patients, and I will always ask them about sleep. And I will say 9 out of 10 of these, and again, it's not exact. I don't have the numbers,
Right.
but they don't sleep. We have night shift workers. We have, all these, when I ask about sleep, you get the answers of, nah, I have the TV on all night. I'm on my phone all night. I don't sleep. But it's really interesting that, we need to sleep. That's so important when it comes to glaucoma. So yeah, nerve health has to do with all that light. So there's UVA. And also, again, hydration. Our hydration is also giving us voltage. So we need that electrical voltage and those electrical signals. Melanin can also play a little bit of a role. We need that ultraviolet light. Melanin, again, it can protect nerve tissue as well. It's an interesting, it helps us collect sunlight, but it's also very protective as well. And it's found there's a lot of melanin sometimes around that nerve tissue. So there's a lot of things that have to do with the sun when it comes to glaucoma. And again, blue light does all the things that I just mentioned. It's definitely not a good thing because it does the opposite of everything I just mentioned.
And especially with blue light, we're talking a lot about that indoor light. So actually, the point you said, the skin and the eyes have to be exposed to that UV light at the same time. Now, what happens when you are outside and you wear sunglasses? Like where does it get screwed up, so to speak?
So if our eyes have sunglasses on, our brain gets a signal that it's nighttime. So it's very confusing for the brain. So let's start with vitamin D, for example. When we're trying to make that vitamin D in our skin, we need the eyes to have the same signal to the brain of what time it is, that there's UV light available, so that our skin can take that cholesterol and sulfate it and make vitamin D. So when we are wearing sunglasses, we don't really make vitamin D as much. We also have another mechanism of safe sun exposure that has to do with light getting into our eyes and our skin. We release, let me backtrack for a moment. When we have that nitric oxide and the blood vessels are dilated, red blood cells will rush to the surface of our skin to collect light because we need light. So what the body does when we've had too much sun is it starts to it takes histidine, which is one of those amino acids, and it transfers it to histamine. So when our cells have had too much sun, our body starts getting pink. The skin gets a little bit pink. That's a histamine reaction. And that's our body's way of saying, all right, you've had enough sun. That's enough. And it's kind of a built-in mechanism, but we can't make that reaction if we're wearing sunglasses. So we can easily burn and not even realize that we got too much sun because that reaction doesn't happen as well. The other thing that histidine can become is something called uricanic acid, which is also a UV filter in our body. So that's protective. And melanin protects us. It's how we start making a tan. We can't do that if we're not getting UV light. And we need that UVA light through our eyes to start making melanin, and we need the same signal for our skin. So melanin is really important. So all of those things are super important. So it's very easy to burn when you have sunglasses on. It's just not normal.
This is so, I mean, I'm looking at the time, I'm like, wow, I can talk to you for hours. I think I did read studies years ago about in dermatology journals about how there's actually a higher risk of getting sunburned when you wear sunglasses. And I always, because the brain thinks it's night, it doesn't secrete. But you explained this on a way deeper level that I now fully understand on an even deeper level. But for just as an observational thing, when I used to wear sunglasses, and let's say it's not super hot, you might be out in the sun all day, you don't realize like how bright the sun is, because even without the brain and all the stuff we talk about, just you stay out longer in the sun because you don't get a sense of, especially if there's a little breeze at the beach. So it all makes total sense that nature has this whole system fully developed. So this was super interesting. I don't see new questions on YouTube, and we will have you back, but hopefully this was interesting. And I know we touched on diabetes, which is related to diabetic retinopathies.
Oh, yes.
All these eye diseases, yes, there is a higher, like one more last thing, two things I want to ask you. First, where people can find you, but secondarily, when we say age-related, a lot of times we hear from the doctor, it's just age or it's genetics. Can you maybe say just a little bit about that? Is it to me, I always say it's more lifestyle related, but of course, aging doesn't help us, right? That is
Right.
more, yeah, okay.
Right. Over time, our mitochondria have a harder time staying healthy. And when we talk about genetic issues, we're all looking for these genes that are causing diseases. And, I guess genes can play a bit of a role, but it really comes down to our mitochondrial health because that's what's controlling every aspect of the health of our body. It's our antenna, it's our energy. So when our mitochondria gets sick, which happens from all of these dysregulated things that we're doing, that's what's creating disease. So I would say there's studies showing that 95% of the illnesses that we have in our world come from mitochondrial dysfunction, not necessarily genetics. And age, it's just over time, it was more oxidative stress. There's more that we're overcoming. This is just it gets harder to repair. So we have to be even more diligent as we age because it is harder to keep our mitochondria healthy. So that's where things are happening, kind of going downhill. It's interesting. We need 70% of our mitochondria to be damaged before we'll even have any symptoms. So there's a lot of stuff going on. We can prevent things, or we can think we're healthy until we're not, and our mitochondria might be a little unhealthy, but we have so many ways to overcome that until we don't. So we just have to be really careful. And light's free. It's an easy thing to do. It makes so much sense. It's one of the most important things that we can do easily. Maybe it's not easy in the sense that people don't want to do it, but we have to make these sacrifices. We can crack open our window in the car if you're on your way. There's so many things we can do to really help get little pieces of the sun.
And you touched on a good thing. I get that question all the time. Do I have to open the modern glass all has like UV blocking and like energy. Again, it's about energy.
Right.
So I posted your Instagram, you're on YouTube. Is how do you work with people telehealth at all? Is it like how can people find you
Yeah.
and work with you?
So I have started working with people via Zoom if we're interested. So on my YouTube channel, and I think on YouTube there's a link if you're interested. There's like an opt-in page. You can send me your email and I can send more information. And again, that's fairly new, but yes, I am offering Zoom consults, more of a quantum eye related consults, or just, overall consults for that. I don't do any eye exams, virtually,
Okay.
but for help, like with certain things, of course, I am starting to work with people one-on-one.
Where are you located for anybody that might be local that wants to?
I'm in New York.
Yeah. Okay, you're in New York, and so if you are in New York area, then that might be, you might be in luck and can person. So thank you so much. This was incredible. We got great feedback on YouTube and here on Zoom about all the information you shared. And I wish, more and more of your colleagues, and I think that your colleagues that I do know that are on that holistic path, they all have their own health journey or their family's health journey. So it's interesting that, once your eyes get open to like, there's all these changes,
Right.
the nature. It's so interesting. I'm grateful that you came on today. Thank you so much. You are just just like so much knowledge about natural eye health and all the things that people can do to actually improve their eyesight. So thank you
Thank you
so
so much. Thank you for having me. I had fun. Thank you so much.
yeah, you're so welcome. We will definitely bring you back. Okay, so goodbye, YouTube, and we will continue our discussion here in the Clear Vision Club privately, but we see you next week with another guest.